So welcome. My name is Debbie Schwartz. I am the founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group. And I'm here tonight with Terry Cowdrey, who is a former vice president and dean of admissions and financial aid at Colby College and Sarah Lawrence University, and has worked with many other colleges since then, helping with their admissions and financial aid strategies. So we're going to talk tonight about making the most of a college visit. And before we get started, I would love to know who's here, have you gone on any visits yet? Do you have a student who is a rising junior, rising senior? We're in that time period where we can start to use the word rising. So I like to kind of refer to people like that. Oh, a rising sophomore. That's great. And if you've gone to any schools, if you want to tell us, which schools you've visited, that would be really interesting. And while you're sharing that in the chat, let me just explain that tonight's recorded. This is officially actually a meeting as opposed to a webinar. And I only say that because you can unmute yourself if you really want to ask a question. You can put yourself on video if you want us to see you, because it's nice to see people's faces. And we will send a link to the recording tomorrow. But other than that, I'm just looking at who is sharing information. So somebody has a rising sophomore. They've visited Sacred Heart University. Someone's visited University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Case Western, Ohio, Carnegie Mellon. I can see that kind of route that happened there. Okay, lots of people have gone on visits. Great. Okay, well, Terry, do you want to give a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll start and you can share your slides?
Certainly. Thanks, Debbie. So I'm thrilled that people are here this evening, and that there's variety in terms of those of you early in the process, perhaps starting with rising sophomores, and those of you who are, I'm sure, anxiously anticipating this next school year, those of you with rising seniors. And I hope that the information I share tonight will be helpful to everyone in some way. I have worked on lots of college campuses at this point. For the majority of my career, I was a traditional admissions person. And as Debbie said, I led the admissions offices at Colby College and actually at St. Lawrence University in Northern New York. And then for the last 10 years, I've been working with colleges primarily as an interim vice president for enrollment. So lots of small liberal arts colleges, but I've also done some consulting with schools like George Washington University and Cornell, University of the Pacific, so some bigger ones. Earlier in my career, I spent 7 years at Vanderbilt University. So again, another place that is broader than the liberal arts colleges where most of my career has been spent. But there are lots of things I think that are similar in terms of advice that can be shared about the campus visit.
Great. Well, thank you. And I just wanted to let people know, we actually have never really done this topic before. Not that it's an important topic and we have articles written about it, but Terry had mentioned that she likes to talk about this topic. So we thought it would be great to share her expertise and she'll, it's going to share lots of tips, but it's always interesting to kind of hear what people who work in admissions, how they view the campus tour, and then kind of the advice that they're sharing with families about the information about what you hope to get out of it, and kind of tips about how you can ask certain questions or what you should be looking for as you're going on tours. Okay, you want to share your slides, Terry? And if you have questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I may interrupt Terry while she's talking, or I might just hold the questions at the end, depending on how we're doing from a time perspective. Okay.
Terrific. I'll go ahead and get started then. And again, I think that for some folks, those of you who have already visited some campuses, you may have some suggestions for the others here. But we'll start with the agenda for tonight, which is planning the visits, what to be doing and thinking about while you're on the campus, and trying to really optimize the time and money that you spend visiting college campuses with your sons and daughters. And certainly we hope to leave plenty of time for questions at the end, and Debbie may throw some questions in as we go along, as people put them into the chat. So this is sort of the classic who, what, when, where, and why, although I decided as I was thinking about this presentation to change the order up. So first of all, we're going to talk about why you should visit, where, which campuses make sense to visit, when should you go on these visits, and again, some of you have done some of these already. Who should participate in the campus visit? This is always an interesting decision for families. And then what should you do while you're on those campuses? So we'll start with first the why. So for most families in the US have the opportunity to visit some college campuses before their sons or daughters make an enrollment choice. Lots of students who live outside of the US but are planning to come to the US for college don't have that opportunity. And so they're doing lots of their research, all of their research nearly online or through interactions like we're doing here tonight. But for everyone, the college search process, whether you're visiting or learning about colleges through online sources, it's one of identification of good options and then elimination of possible colleges. We're very fortunate to have over 3,000 colleges in this country, and there are lots of great colleges and universities that US students attend in the UK and Canada and other places. And so trying to figure out how to eliminate lots of those colleges is one of the things that families do. Most students are seeking colleges where they're going to be challenged, successful, and happy. And many of the students are thinking about college initially based on where their friends have gone, if they have older friends or siblings, schools they've heard of through the news or often through ESPN. But what they ultimately need to choose for a place to be for 4 years is a place where they'll be challenged, successful, and happy. I think lots of parents want that for their kids as well, but they also want to be sure their students are going to be supported in whatever way those individual students may need. And also that they'll be prepared for life after college. Certainly some students are thinking very seriously about how the undergraduate experience will prepare them for life after college, but virtually all parents are thinking about that as they help their children with the college search process. When you're test driving a college, when you're doing a campus visit, your goal is to learn enough to either reinforce that initial interest that your son or daughter has, or learn enough to contradict it. So you may find, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, that a college visit eliminates a school from a list that your son or daughter has. And that may surprise you, but it's an important element of that process, because it is sometimes true that a college doesn't necessarily live up to the image that a particular person has. So then you need to decide where the student's going to visit. And again, for some of you who are working with younger kids right now, students who are rising sophomores, some of those students will use the campus visit early in the sorting process because they'll want to discover, do I want a big school in a city? Do I want a small college in a small town? Do I want a place with 2,000 students or with 25,000 students? And for lots of teenagers, that's really hard to imagine. We ask them those questions, but it's a little unfair because for many of them, if they haven't experienced it, they don't really know how to imagine it. And so for some families, there's this important piece of the search process where they'll go and visit perhaps a small college and a large university in the area where they live, or in an area where they're maybe on vacation or they're visiting relatives or something like that, just to get a sense of what that might be like. I could think of a young friend who realized when she visited one school and learned she would need to take shuttle buses from one class to her residence hall to the student center, that that was not her image of what her college experience was going to be like. But she didn't know that until she actually got to the campus. For other families, those of you who have seniors or have students who will be seniors in the fall, if you haven't done visits yet, please know you're not late in the process. Each student does it a little differently. And for some families, this is about actually visiting once the student has narrowed down some of the choices. So it's important for the parents on the call tonight to understand that you're kind of in charge of setting the ground rules. How much research do your sons or daughters need to do before a visit? Are you able, through working with your school counselor, an independent counselor, a leader in a community organization, to understand if your student is going to be competitive for admission? One of the things that can be really hard for students sometimes is to visit 2 or 3 schools, only then to learn that they really don't have the kinds of grades that will make them competitive for admission at the schools that they've already visited. And that's a waste of their time and their money, and your money perhaps, as well as it can be kind of demoralizing for students. So initially you need to think about, are we visiting schools? How much do we need to know about the schools before we really invest, particularly if this is going to be an expensive trip for you to take? One of the things I'll mention, there are certain states, a number of them, Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, who do what they call private college visit weeks, where they will, a number of colleges within that state will set up a schedule where families can go and visit all of them or several of them during a single week, usually in the summer. And that's something that for families who say, gosh, he's narrowed his choices down. He knows he wants to be in Ohio. That's where we used to live, or that's an area of the country that he's familiar with. We want to go and visit 4 schools in Ohio during the 3rd week of July. In some places, that's something that's set up almost for you to do, designed for you to do. What I've found working in the Northeast is that we often had during the summer families who would schedule a week of college visits and visit 4 to 8 schools that they scheduled on their own over the course of a week. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to plan enough time for the campus visits. What I will say is that if at all possible, it's really important to visit your top choice college, or any college that's considered a top choice. Your son or daughter might have 3 top choices, at least once after being admitted. And that the exception to that is with early decision, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But when a student visits a college after they know they've been admitted, and after you know how much it will cost for your son or daughter to attend, you're able to look at the college through a different lens. And so it's important to visit after admission, I think, if at all possible. For students who are thinking about applying early decision, the same thing is sort of true in that it's really important to make sure you visited before making an early decision commitment. It is not something that a commitment that you make lightly, and you want to make sure that you have a clear sense, your son or daughter has a clear sense of what they're committing to.
So Terry, I'm just curious, when you said,
Sure.
Visiting after the student is admitted, a lot of schools have, admitted student days. And
Right.
Do you think it's important to go and visit the school? I mean, those are nice days, but do you think you get a realistic picture of the school when you go to those are like very planned days versus like trying to go on a normal day when they don't have everything, like so spruced up?
Debbie, it's a great question, and I think that there are pros and cons to each. What I would say is, if a student visits on an admitted student day, one of the benefits is that they'll get to meet a lot of other students who have been admitted to the college, right? So they will get to meet potential classmates. And for some students, that's one of the things they really enjoy about those admitted student days. Over time, I would say that's something that we've done more and more on the college level to provide opportunities for the admitted students to get together on those days without kind of interference. So I'll use the example, I was working at Beloit College this past year as the interim leader of enrollment. And at the lunchtime of our admitted student days, it was admitted students only eating lunch together. No parents, no faculty. We did have some Beloit students available if they had questions, but our goal was really to give the students a chance to meet one another. At the same time, you're absolutely right. There are panel presentations usually. There's usually, now often photo booths and
Right.
opportunities, right? It's more of a festive atmosphere. And I think for lots of students that they would prefer to come on a Tuesday that works in their schedule and maybe sit in on a class or eat lunch in the dining hall and be a little more anonymous, right? Be more of a observer of what's going on, but not necessarily a participant in a celebratory event. But I do think whichever a student chooses to do, I do think that one of the key pieces of this is that the student who is visiting is less stressed. They're more willing to ask hard questions because they've already been admitted. And so, and I think parents too are often willing to ask harder questions after a student's been offered admission. So that's just something to consider. The important thing I had mentioned before about the idea of if you visit before the decision, if you visit early in the college search process, it is helpful to do if you don't know the type of school that you want. And it does allow you to cross schools off your list. Most students will start with a list of schools they're interested in that is larger than the list of schools they will ultimately apply to. And some of that elimination is just by visiting and being able to say, gosh, this is just not a place that I can really picture myself. One important thing, though, that I want to mention, there are still colleges out there that do something called keep track of demonstrated interest. And what that means is they keep track of who visits their campus. And it can be a consideration in the actual process of choosing which students to admit. The important thing to note there is number one, students shouldn't visit a campus without checking in with the admissions office. So say your son or daughter has a good friend who's a year older going to a college that they're interested in, and so they go up and visit with their friend. It's still helpful for them to check in with the admissions office to make sure that if in fact the college is tracking whether or not they have demonstrated the interest by making a campus visit, that they're given sort of the appropriate check mark for that activity. You can always ask admissions offices, and it's particularly good if students make this request, whether or not demonstrated interest is something that is considered in the admissions process. Some schools are very forthright and say that right on their websites that that's one of the things that is considered. Other schools are a little more obtuse about whether that's something that they are considering. but it is one of the areas that I think is important for you to at least be aware could have an influence on an admissions decision.
And the other place that demonstrated interest shows up, and you tell me how accurate it is it in a school's common data set? There's a
Yes.
question that they ask, or it's part of the admissions factors.
Right.
And it marks whether how now I know, remember, it's basically like how important demonstrated interest is to that college.
Right. And I do think that you can generally trust the common data set information. And if any of you are not familiar with that, that's information that typically can be found on college websites. If you just actually do a search for common data set, or sometimes it's abbreviated just with the initials CDS. And if you're able to access that information on a college website, I think you can generally trust it. I think the hard part is if you have a college, for example, that suddenly gets an increase in applications next year that becomes more competitive to gain admission to, what has been reported in the past is what's been used in the past, not always what will be used in the future. And so that's just something to keep in mind. The other thing I just do want to mention, I had talked about a minute ago, the states where there are these summer weeks where the colleges kind of get together and make it a schedule that allows families to visit a number of schools. When you visit a campus in the summer, it is not representative of what it will be like during the academic school year. Now, there are definitely campuses that are livelier in the summer than others because there's summer school that is often an opportunity for excellent students to get ahead, for excellent students to take additional courses, to add a second major late, etc. Sometimes students taking summer school classes, it's because they want to take organic chemistry when they're not taking anything else, so that they can really focus. But lots of campuses during the summer are used for things other than traditional undergraduate classes. Lots and lots of sports camps, lots of high school enrichment camps, some elder hostel type programs. And so even if the campus is active during the summer with lots of people around, it won't be representative of what the student's going to experience during the traditional academic year. Still can be very useful to visit in the summer, but if a student falls in love with a school they visited in the summer, I would strongly encourage them to visit again when school is in session, either before their early decision deadline, if that's what the route they're going to go, or after they've been after they've been admitted, if they're a student who applies regular decision or early action or has until May 1st to make their enrollment choice. Just to move on a little bit here, who should participate in the campus visit? I would say that at this time in the current year, it is most typical for a student to come with one parent or guardian on the campus visit. Sometimes two parents are there, and sometimes a grandparent or an aunt or uncle may stand in for the parent on some campuses. Whether or not to bring siblings on campus visits is an individual family choice, but what I would encourage you to do is to be cautious about bringing younger siblings who are middle school and younger. It is not a terribly exciting experience for them usually, and it can be distracting, frankly, for you, for their older sibling who's there to evaluate the college, etc. I think it's perfectly fine if you're going with a rising senior to a campus and you have a rising sophomore or even a rising freshman to bring that student along, that sibling along, because they can start to get an idea about the college search process. And again, I should be forthright in saying I was in the 6th grade when I went with my brother to some colleges. I was a little nerdy, and so I always brought my book with me, and I was, kind of happily engaged with that while my brother was doing the campus visit things. But I will say that it's not easy to bring, a family of 5 or 6 to the campus visit, and it's not necessary. I think that what we find often is that if one parent comes with the student for the early visit, for a visit where they're just trying to decide if this is a place of interest, sometimes the other parent will accompany the student if they come back for a second visit to one of their top choices. What do you do during a campus visit? Lots of you know because you've been on them, but for those of you who haven't had the opportunity yet, the most basic kind of campus visit typically involves a campus tour led usually by an undergraduate, and an information session of some sort, led sometimes by an admissions professional, sometimes by a student intern, often accompanied by a PowerPoint, but not always. And at some schools, it's a package deal. There's a sort of notion that you come for typically 90 minutes to 2 hours, and you do the information session first, followed by the tour. The reason schools will do that, or sometimes the reverse order, is they want to make sure that everybody, the tour guide, for example, wants to know everybody on the tour has just heard a set of information that the guide does not need to repeat, right? It's almost the introduction to the tour, the setup for the tour. At the reverse, when the information session follows the tour, often the person leading the information session is going to start asking the audience, what did you see? What were you surprised by? But again, knows that everybody in the room has been on that tour. Interviews are still offered at some colleges. They are, to my knowledge, not required by any college for all students. Certainly not required on campus for all students. There are scholarship competitions that require an interview, but typically those can be either in person or on Zoom. And there are certainly some students who feel that they want to request an interview because they have information they want to share that may not be really transparent in their application. An example might be a student who has changed high school more than once. And why did they do that? And they want to have an opportunity to talk about the things that caused that to happen. Sometimes it's a student who really wants to get very detailed information about a very specific major. And so they will ask to have an interview. The important thing here, though, to mention, and I'll talk a little bit more about things to watch out for later, but if a college doesn't offer an interview, don't ask them for one. You should not expect exceptions to be made because this is the process the college is choosing to use for their particular needs. So you want to know what's available. You want to take advantage of the things that make sense to you and your son or daughter, but don't expect for things to be made an exception. Another example I will give is that many colleges do not offer campus tours on Sundays. Some do only at certain times of year, but it is not appropriate to ask for a campus tour on a Sunday if that's not part of what the typical process is at that particular school. We talked about the admitted student events a minute ago, but many colleges will have really at all different times of year what they call visit days or open house programs. Lots of colleges have at least one, if not 2 of those in the spring for juniors or sophomores, or sometimes transfer students. Often there will be those programs held in the summer and then typically in the fall. You'll find, for example, that lots of colleges on Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day will offer a visit day or open house program because they know so many students have that day off from school. On those special program days, you're able to, again, get typically a more thorough sense of the school. There's often a faculty or student panel. Sometimes there are tours of special facilities like science laboratories or arts facilities that may not be on the regular campus tour. And sometimes there are different speakers from the campus. So that's something to keep your eye on if that sounds like it would be appealing to your family. The special focus visit. We hear about this a lot with athletics. There are definitely coaches that will have special football visit days or volleyball visit days or lacrosse visit days, but it also happens in sciences and often happens in the arts at different schools. So again, you want your son or daughter, as they're thinking about the colleges, as they're forming their lists, to be regularly checking what are the opportunities on the campus for visits. If they have shared their contact information with the colleges, they will be getting texts and they will be getting emails, and you may be as well. So it is rare that students aren't aware of what's going on. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is rare that the information isn't being sent to the students, but sometimes the students aren't always staying kind of up on what's going on. They're busy. They've got a lot going on. But you don't want to miss an opportunity that you think would be helpful for your student. And then scholarship competitions. There are lots of colleges that have invitation-only scholarship competitions. These typically happen from November through February, with often December and January being the big months for scholarship competitions. And again, some of those require students to go to a campus. Many of them give an option of doing an on-campus scholarship competition or doing it virtually. But it's, again, another way to visit and another thing to keep in mind. So questions on the tour. I won't read all of these. You can do that and it will be on the video. But what I want to suggest is that you don't want to ask questions on the tour that you can answer easily from the website, right? You don't want to ask yes and no questions on a tour. Most tour guides are trained well to even answer a yes/no question with something that's more interesting than a single word. But I think that your family needs to think about what are the things that your son or daughter want to know more about? What are the maybe intangibles that they think they want to learn from having a current student available to them? Some campus tours will be quite small. At small liberal arts colleges, there are some tours that are only a couple of families at a time. Many tours are large, even at small colleges. There might be 50 or 60 people on a campus tour. You'll have less opportunity to ask questions on a tour that's large, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a couple of favorite questions that you either ask in the big group or ask the tour guide as you're gathering at the beginning of the tour or at the end of the tour. But again, always think about, can I get this answer on the website? And if you can, don't use your time on the campus tour to get those kinds of questions answered. Again, these are just some hints about enhancing your experience, optimizing the time and effort and money that have gone into the campus visit. I mentioned before that every college offers different things for their own reasons. And so that's part of this college process in general. It's similar to the way we all have some different forms or different questions or different ways of going about the process. Don't expect the exceptions. You can always ask for an exception. I'm not saying you should feel you cannot ask, but you shouldn't expect an exception. This is one of the hardest ones. Do not visit too many colleges at once. Colleges know on those Fridays in July and August when the student has been on the, march through campuses all week long, because by Friday they're pooped, and even the best students have an awful hard time staying really engaged. And so it's important to spread out the campus visits a bit and to allow enough time for the students to kind of refresh and be ready to engage once again when they come to their next campus. This is an important one. It's really helpful when a student walks into an admissions office with mom or dad or both in tow, and the student says, "I'm here for my appointment. I'm here for my campus tour. I'm here for the information session." It's also perfectly fine if the student says, "I'm here with my family for the information session," or "We're here for the 11 o'clock information session and tour." What's not helpful is when a parent takes the lead, when the parent is the one saying, "We're here for our college visit." Does not impress anyone who might hear that. And so it's important for you to, again, as parents, make your expectations with your son or daughter clear. Wear comfortable clothes and shoes. This is not a time that a young man needs to wear a coat and tie for a campus visit, particularly if he's not ever worn one before, or very rarely. You want to be comfortable during the campus visit. At the same time, you want to be respectful in what you're wearing and not have whatever you're wearing be distracting. One of my favorites is, please don't wear college gear that says X college when you're visiting Y college. That does not impress and kind of makes people feel bad. So be respectful to everybody. There's nothing worse than the family that's rude to the receptionist and then nice as can be to the admissions representative, or is unkind to the student tour guide, but is, again, kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when it comes to the admissions person. Be respectful to everyone. And then probably the most important, and this means putting away your phones, but you need to pay attention, be active listeners, and ask thoughtful questions. Phones have their place, particularly in snapping pictures, if there are things that you want to remember about particular campuses. But it's really important that there is a level of engagement on your part so that you're optimizing the time that you're spending on that campus.
Can I just add to that, Terry, about being an active listener? And I just found this whenever I visit colleges, both, just to visit colleges and with my own kids, that if you're active, you can usually hear the things that are important to that college. Like they will repeat specific words. They might repeat phrases over and over again. And all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, I get it. Like that's what's really important to that school. But they're not necessarily going to hold up a sign that say, these are my 3 most important things, but you can hear it if you're being active in the listening and being really paying attention to what they're presenting on their slides.
It's such a good point. You can really get a sense sometimes of values and principles and even of new initiatives potentially at a college by being an active listener. So one of my favorite things is actually the importance of after the visit. And I'll come back at the end to some do's and don'ts, but after the visit, how did what you see and hear reflect what you thought you knew about the college, right? Was it just exactly aligned? It was what you had hoped for, you saw it, you felt it, you heard it? Or were there some things that were discordant for you, where you thought, oh, I thought that this was a place where studying internationally was really strongly encouraged, but didn't the tour guide say you had to have a 3.5 in order to get to study abroad. I've got to learn more about that, right? So you want to know, you want to decide for yourself, did you reinforce your impression or did you hear some different things? Probably if you remember one thing from tonight's presentation, I strongly encourage that for 30 minutes after the campus visit, if you're in a Uber or a Lyft to the airport, you're in a rental car, you're in your own car because you've driven, you're on the train, whatever it is, 30 minutes, no headphones for the son, the daughter, the parents, maybe the younger siblings can have their headphones. But there needs to be 30 minutes of conversation. What did you think? What did you see? What did you like best? Was there anything that worried you? There needs to be that discussion time in order to be sure there's the reflection time, right? One reinforces the other. And what comes out of the discussion is the evaluation. Did the visit keep the college in consideration or cross the school off the list? And if it's a college that's still in the running, did the visit change your degree of interest in the school? Did it move it up the list? Or is it, not quite as interested as I thought I was? I mentioned before this notion of demonstrated interest and the fact that students are visiting colleges and colleges will ultimately be evaluating their applications. At the same time, and maybe more importantly, the student, along with the supportive parents, is evaluating the colleges, right? And so it's very important that you feel perfectly comfortable when a campus visit results in crossing a college off the list. That's as useful a campus visit as one that reinforces that that is a place that your son or daughter would like to go. And then, are there questions that came up during the visit that you need answers to, right? So maybe the tour guide wasn't really sure about whether you can double major in music performance and chemistry. They thought you could, but they weren't sure if maybe that would take more than 8 semesters. Well, that's a question that you might want to get the answer to from an admissions person, from a faculty member, from someone other than that student tour guide who can't know the answer to everything. So you want to make sure you're jotting down questions that may have come up that need some follow-up. And again, jotting down what you liked, what you didn't like, so you don't have to remember which was the school that had the really cool seating in the library, which was the school that had cereal available at every meal, which was the school that kind of felt like it was in a shady area of the city. You want to make sure that you've taken notes so that you don't have to try to remember. The things to do for sure, again, this is repetitive somewhat, insist that your student research the schools thoroughly online before spending time and money on campus visits. You shouldn't be asking questions during the visit that are easily answered on the website. Do plan sufficient time for each visit and between each visit. I've mentioned that before, but it's really important that you're not running to one campus after having just visited another and feeling like you haven't had that time for even any reflection, never mind discussion of what you've just experienced. Ideally, you should include time on every campus visit to explore both the campus and the area in which the college is located on your own. This is usually most easily done after the scheduled events, right? So you've gone to the information session, you've taken the official campus tour, but now you want to, especially if school is in session, wander around a little bit, go to the student center, pick up a copy of the newspaper if they're still publishing a print form, check out kind of what's going on maybe on the, in the public spaces of the campus. And then you want to explore where the campus is located. Anybody who's bought a home in the last few years knows that you can go online and look at a beautiful house that looks just awesome online and then you do a visit to that particular house. You drive by to see if you want to talk to your realtor about it, and you see what's on the left and what's on the right, and you're no longer interested in that house because you want to know what is the campus, where is the campus located, what is around it. And that's everything from, is there the kind of activities that your son or daughter enjoys? Working at St. Lawrence and Colby, frankly, for a number of years, we had lots and lots of students who wanted easy access to skiing and snowboarding. They wanted winter activities. Working at Vanderbilt, there were definitely students who wanted to be right in the heart of a major US city. And so none of this is right or wrong, but you want to explore, if a school's in a city, is it in an area of the city where the students are comfortable going off campus or not? So you want to explore the area as well. And then do understand, as I've mentioned before, that students often will want to visit a top choice more than once. Last slide here, and then we can take some questions while there's time. If possible, and I know some of you have already done some campus visits, but if possible, you don't want your first campus visits to be with the dream schools, the schools that might be out of reach academically or financially. It's really hard if a student falls in love with one or more of those dream schools, and then finds out that it's not something that's going to be affordable for your family, or they're unlikely to gain admission. It's much more helpful if a student can fall in love with one of their target schools first. And by target, I just mean a school that, from the research you've been able to do, your son or daughter looks like their credentials are solidly in the profile of that school, and financially it's a school that, through either its actual cost and your resources or the availability of merit scholarships, you believe will be something your family can afford. Don't turn every family vacation into a chance to visit colleges. Though I mentioned before, that might actually be something you do, is visit a couple of colleges when you're in a different part of the country on vacation. It shouldn't be the case that every time you're driving in the car and you see a sign for a college, an exit off the highway, that your car immediately veers to go visit that particular college. Kids need vacation too. And so it's important, again, to balance the need for taking advantage of when you might be in an area with kind of the readiness of your son or daughter to actually make a campus visit. Some of you I know are parents of rising sophomores, and probably some are parents of rising freshmen. And I have a sentence here that I do think is true, that parents of sophomores are absolutely ready to visit colleges. Lots of sophomores aren't quite ready, especially if they haven't begun 10th grade. There are exceptions to every rule. And so you know your kids best, but you just want to make sure that the college process doesn't completely overwhelm all of your family time. One of the hardest things, I think, for some families is when a student has an immediate reaction, positive or negative, to a campus. And when I say immediate, it's you pull into the parking lot and your son looks at you and says, "I hate it here. I don't want to go on the tour." And you think, it hasn't even had time to make you hate it. How can this be? I encourage you, if that happens, to say, "Hey, we made the trip. Let's at least take the tour. We don't have to stay longer than the tour if that's something that, if you still are not feeling positive at the end of that experience." But it's something that does happen, where some students just have this immediate reaction. It also happens on the reverse, though, where you will pull into a parking lot and your son or daughter will say, "This is it. I love it. This is where I want to be." And you think, we haven't gotten out of the parking lot. How can this be? But there are certain students and certain campuses where these reactions happen. I think it should be tempered, that emotional reaction, with actually getting some information. But my encouragement to you here is just to not be surprised if it happens, and don't feel like it's only your son or daughter that's doing it. It has happened to lots of students through the years. And then last, just don't ever undervalue a campus visit that helps eliminate a college. That has been just as helpful as a visit that reinforces a strong interest, because in the end, they're only going to go to one. And so narrowing down the possibilities and the places where they think they can picture themselves is part of the process. And so with that, I'm happy to take some questions. Probably Debbie will have a few for me, and we can go from there.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Terry. We definitely have a few interesting questions. One is somebody mentioned, and I've kind of heard this too, that they've been on some trips, I'm sorry, some tours, and that they've asked questions, and it particularly maybe about housing, and they feel like they haven't always gotten an honest answer. Maybe the school said, oh yes, there's always enough housing for, for 4 years if your student wants it. And then they talk to other students who's, on campus, and they said, oh no, after sophomore year, like we have trouble getting housing. How can you, I hate to say it, but sometimes if you're really getting like the correct information, truthful information, like the right information.
Sure. So I do think that you should trust your instincts to a certain extent. And so if for example, they said, a school, you've heard a school may have some issues with having enough housing for all their students, but the tour guide or the admissions representative kind of almost poo-poos the notion and says, oh, sure, it's not a problem at all. This can be where the unscheduled time on campus can come in handy, because you can be in the student center or on the pathway across campus and see a couple of students and say, hey, we're visiting, can we just ask you a quick question? And ask them about their experience with the housing process. You may find that the 2 students who you poll say, yeah, I've never had a problem. I don't know any of my friends who have had problems. You may have someone who said, I had a problem sophomore year because they didn't know how big the first year class was going to be. It all ended up working out, but I didn't know where I was going to live till the end of the summer. So you get some information there. But I do think that this is a perfectly appropriate parent follow-up question by email to a college official. And it can be the admissions office. It could be the director of residence life. Their names and contact info are on the website. But the reason I say via email is it allows you to write out your question or questions, and it requires generally them to respond in writing. And so there's not a confusion of, oh, you misunderstood what I said. There's no, these were my questions. You gave me these answers. And again, every college is concerned about retaining its students and making sure that their students are satisfied with the experience they're getting. So I don't think that there is intentional misrepresentation, but I do think there are times where it is perhaps put in a rosier view when talking with families that are visiting than perhaps has been the experience of all the students there.
And while we're on the topic of housing, I found that some colleges, happily take you to, a dorm and let you see it, and others do not. Any reasons why? And if the school does not, I guess you could, again, maybe ask some students on campus, but, how important do you think it is to see the dorms and living facilities?
So again, it's going to vary from student to student. For many students, I think it has become more important to see what the housing is, how it is organized and what it's looking like. What I will say is, I know some colleges that specifically do their housing tours during admitted student events. And so that when I was talking before about sometimes there are additional specific facilities tours, sometimes that's done at those times. Some campuses have what they call a sample room, a show room, as we call it. That's all, always on the first floor of a residence hall, is typically a pretty typical first year dorm, but doesn't necessarily include the variety of housing that's there. I think one of the things that colleges wrestle with is privacy of their current students, right? And so I could think of when I was at Vanderbilt, one of the things we did there, I mean, this is long ago now, but we did a video of almost every residence hall so that we could, it was like a 30-minute, maybe 20-minute video, but anybody who wanted to view it could, but we were able to do that without, again, disrupting a current student's life on a particular day when a family happened to be visiting. Most colleges will provide now on their websites, like everything from floor plans to dimensions and that kind of thing. So if you're concerned about those elements, that's one thing. If you have more of a question of, again, are the screens tight, and does the cold air leak in, or what do the bathrooms look like, then that's going to be a little bit harder typically to know, to be able to really assess ahead of time.
So one thing I guess you didn't kind of comment on is how much stock should parents, should other students place in the actual tour guide, especially if they're a student. Sometimes, they could just be, they're just great. They're just, and and everybody connects with the student. Other times they may not be that great of a tour guide. And unfortunately that could put a damper on how the family views the school, which might not be valid. Sorry. Go ahead.
So it's an interesting question, because I think, again, on most campuses now, student tour guides are paid positions. Many years ago, they were volunteer, but now they are typically paid jobs on campus. And on lots of campuses, it's a rigorous process to be selected to be a guide. However, part of that process is selecting students who are having a very positive experience. And so it does also speak to, I think, that preference for you to have some conversation with current students who have not been curated for your visit, right? So that's the walking around on the campus, maybe stopping in. I've used the student center a lot. Not every campus has a student center, but sometimes it's the dining hall that you can go into. And often you'll find that students on many campuses are willing to stop and answer a couple of questions because whether they're very happy at their school or not so happy at their school, they're usually willing to share their experiences. But I think part of it, when you think about the tour guide and their credibility, I always will measure a tour guide's credibility in part by their ability to kind of give pros and cons and to give a balanced perspective. I think that it is easier for students to do if they are slightly older. I think juniors and seniors are better tour guides typically than students in the spring of their first year or in their sophomore year. But it is often just the individual student themselves. I don't think that most campuses any longer are really scripting their students, but there are things that students are asked not to talk about. And some of that goes with politics, right? And the politics of different states. So I expect that there are certain states now where tour guides are not talking a lot about diversity and equity initiatives. And so that's not necessarily because they don't want to, but there are the, kind of regulations that limit what areas students are going to be promoting. The bottom line is that if your son or daughter loves a school, but then you feel like the tour guide is a bit of a dud, it's even more important, I think, to continue to try to connect with other people. If your son or daughter has sort of not a lot of an opinion one way or the other, they're kind of neutral about a school, and they don't connect with the tour guide, and you spend some time on the campus and they say to you, gee, I just don't see myself here, then I think that that's a perfectly good reason to eliminate a college from the list. Because again, most students are not trying to find more places to apply to. They're trying to narrow down their options to a reasonable number.
So a few people asked about the value of virtual tours, whether it's a tour that the college has put together, or somebody mentioned, and I don't know if you've seen it, like that Amazon has a series called College Tours.
Yeah. So the Amazon series is a great one. It's really expensive for colleges to do. So it's a big, big investment for the colleges to do that. And I think one of the challenges that lots of colleges have, I've worked at 2 of the schools that are using it now. But if they're a campus that is doing much in the way of building on campus or renovations or refurbishments, it's hard to think about investing in something that then is going to change quickly. Whereas the virtual tours are at least that are hosted by the colleges themselves are more able to be updated regularly. I think the virtual tour has a couple of uses. One, I think it could be part of the research that the student or you do ahead of time. There may be facilities that you see during that virtual tour that you very much want to see in person when you're there, and you can learn that through the virtual tour. I also think the virtual tour can be a really helpful thing for the student to sit down with perhaps the parent who didn't go on the campus visit, and go through after the visit and say, yeah, the way this looks at it looks like the soccer field's right next to the baseball field. They're really not that close. They're kind of far away, but the soccer field is right near the dining hall, et cetera, whatever it might be, whatever is of interest to your son or daughter. But I see the virtual tour as having both a use prior to and after the campus visit itself. It also can be really helpful if you're in a situation where perhaps your son or daughter is going to apply to colleges across the country. You're not going to visit them until after all of the offers of admission and scholarship are in. The student can still get a pretty good sense of some parts of the campus, what it looks like, even if not what it feels like, through that virtual tour. And I should just mention again, I think the Amazon series of the college tour is great. I think they do a really nice job with it. But don't assume that the colleges that haven't participated yet don't think it's a good idea. It's more of a sort of, what are we going to not do if we in fact choose to invest in this particular product?
That's good to know. And admissions offices, like what if a student wants to actually be able to talk to a few students who maybe are in the major that they're thinking of? Can the admissions office help facilitate that?
At many colleges, admissions offices can help facilitate that. And you can actually find sometimes on the admissions website, if there's a link to contact us, there sometimes is contact us and meet your admissions counselor, but also ask a student or meet our ambassadors, and with the contact information there, which is a good place to start. If there's in fact a student there who has the academic interest that your student has. It is always okay, however, for you, really student here at this point, for the student to reach out to the admissions office, typically to their assigned admissions counselor, if that's something that they can easily find online, and say, gee, I'm interested in this college and I'm particularly interested in anthropology, and I'm kind of want to know what it's like to be an anthropology major. Could you connect me with a current student? The admissions office should be able to do that. And even if your assigned counselor doesn't necessarily know anyone right away to ask to do so, they've got ways to connect with the faculty or with their colleagues in admissions to say, hey, does anyone know a current student who's an anthro major? And before you know it, they've sent back an email introduction of the student who's on campus to the student in high school who's interested. That's perfectly appropriate to do, both for academic interest, and it could be somebody who's been really involved in Key Club and wants to be involved in Circle K in college, or they are wanting to understand what the Hillel is really like on campus, or they play Ultimate Frisbee and they want to know more about the Ultimate Frisbee team. Whatever it might be, those kinds of questions are perfectly appropriate.
And I would encourage, students to figure out what it is that they want to really know, like that next level of information on, and try and and ask the admissions office for that help in connecting to the right student. Because again, I've learned more, my students have learned more from talking to the students than sometimes the tour itself. Like you hear about a certain major, economics, that, maybe that it's, you can't always really tell, but the student will tell you, oh, like economics here is very theoretical, as to, at a different school, it's very practical. Or, I had a hard time switching from one major to the other, or, we got internships very easily through this process. And that's just like, it's kind of like on the ground information that you don't always get, when you're listening to presentations.
And it's particularly helpful, I think, because it also is that one-on-one, right? Because anybody who's doing a group presentation, whether it's on tour or in the info session, is trying to kind of address everybody without really knowing anybody in the room, not without knowing what their interests and questions are. And so, to be honest, I think admissions people like it when someone says, hey, I'm interested in X. Can you connect me with a student I could talk to about that? Because it's a very specific kind of way to try to assist the student in their process. And so it feels, I think, perhaps more satisfying than sometimes just doing general information to everyone.
Okay, so a few other quick questions. Somebody asked about after the visit, should they send thank you notes? Should they be following up? I mean, some of these questions, but should they acknowledge, back to the college about their visit?
Again, great question. I think this is another thing that's changed over time. I think that if a student walks away from the campus visit with a business card from an admissions person that they've had an individual conversation with, from a tour guide, some of those students have business cards. It's a faculty member for sure. It's always nice to send a quick email. It doesn't have to be a handwritten note that just simply says, I appreciated the opportunity to visit X college. Thanks for answering my questions about the anthro department. Have a great weekend. I mean, it really that simple. There doesn't need to be, this is not about establishing a pen pal relationship. It is about acknowledging that someone did a good job doing their job in some ways. And if it's a faculty member, maybe who made a specific arrangement for a student to sit in on an instrumental lesson or something like that, somebody maybe did something a little above and beyond, thanking that person is always a good idea, right? Because that's not necessarily the main part of their work. But it is appreciated. It is not required. I think the more important thing in my mind is don't let your questions go unanswered. So if you have questions that didn't get answered during the visit, either that you came to the campus with and they didn't get answered, or that arose as a result of your campus visit, you absolutely want to be following up.
So I guess along those lines, somebody had asked, like, is it appropriate if they have some maybe personal health questions that they want to ask? It sounds like maybe they can do that off to the side, or that could be some follow-up questions that they can have after the tour.
So again, great questions, and lots of students do have some specific questions, whether it's about health and wellness,
Right.
physical and mental health, whether it's about support for various learning differences or physical disabilities. And I think that the most important thing there is to think about, to try to think who's best positioned to answer my question, right? It is rarely going to be the tour guide in those cases, though it may be. But the tour guides have also been encouraged to not feel like they have to divulge any of their personal information, right? And so it is perfectly fine when scheduling the visit for perhaps to send an email and say, gee, you know, we plan to be on campus the third week of October. My son has some specific health challenges that require kind of close monitoring. Can we meet with somebody in the health center while we're on campus? And you might get a response back, no, that person's not available when you're visiting, but here's their contact information. Feel free to call or email them, right? And so it's not, again, always going to be like, oh yes, that person's available at the perfect time on the perfect day. But it started it's opened the door for those conversations. And I think that those are important conversations to have, because I'll use learning differences for a moment. There are colleges that have programs for students with learning differences, and there are colleges that have services for students with learning differences. Those are very different, and different students need different degrees of support. And you want to make sure that you're helping your son or daughter find the places that are going to help them be their best selves. And so you just want to make sure that you're not making an assumption that because one college offers a program, all the other colleges will offer the same sorts of things.
Okay, and last quick question is, how important is it to connect or reach out to the regional admissions rep, you know, for your particular student? Either, you know, to meet them at, if, you know, at the tour, or to just let them know that you're coming.
Sure. So I think that it is, many colleges now make it easy to find on the website who the admissions staff person is assigned to work with high schools from a particular geographic region, right? So if you can find that on the website, you live in Massachusetts and you find on the website that the person at the colleges your son or daughter is looking at, who works with students who attend high school in Western Mass, and it's usually based on where the student attends high school, or if homeschooled, where they live. If your student goes to boarding school, it's school-based, not address-based. Then it is perfectly fine for a student at any point in the process to send that person an email introducing themselves and just say, hey, my name's John Smith. I just wanted to let you know I'm going to be a senior this year at fill in the blank high school. And I'm really interested in X college. I'll be sure to reach out if I have any additional questions. Boom. Then, you know, again, you've opened that door. In fact, at some colleges, when your son or daughter gives their information, they may get an email of that sort from the admissions representative saying, hey, I'm Jane Doe, and I'm the admissions representative for students who attend high schools in Western Mass. You know, please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. In terms of contacting them before the visit, it's, again, never a bad thing to do, but you should assume that they won't be there, not because they're not working, but because particularly during the fall, they're out visiting high schools and attending college fairs. During the summer, they may be there, but that may be when they're out on vacation. So you're not necessarily going to connect during your campus visit with the person from your region. That's especially true for many colleges that have actually staff that physically live in the regions where they recruit and are not campus-based, working day in and day out in the admissions office. So it's never a bad thing to establish a relationship with the person assigned to your region, but it is not something that you should assume is going to be part of the campus visit everywhere you go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Terry. This was really helpful. Lots of good tips. I love your comment, which is so true, that there's value even if a student takes a college off their list from visiting. So I know that everybody here tonight got a lot of value out of it, and I know people will be watching. So thank you for all of your advice.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, and I wish you all to have a lot of fun making these campus visits with your kids, because they can be really quite a good experience and a good way for you each to get to know one another a little better.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Thanks, Terry.